Now, some of you saw Mr. John Tant hanging around here today. Now, I was talking to him, seeing if he wanted to speak today, but he said, no, I'd rather not, but I know somebody. I know somebody who would like to speak today to you. And so he found this gentleman. His name is the Bishop of Myra, and he's going to come and speak to you instead of John. So at this time, the Bishop of Myra, he is here. Oh, well, we were wondering if he was going to make it, but he made it. He's here. The Bishop of Myra.
Charete. Ego imi Nikolai Episcopal Muron. No, that's not word. Hallo, mein Name ist Nicholas, Bischof von Myra.
Hello. Hello. Hi. Thanks for coming.
I am sorry. English, yes. This is America. Trust me, I tell you that being born in 270 AD, I'm getting a bit old and sometimes a bit forgetful. So I must use my notes, so please forgive, it will not be so extemporaneous. Your land and your people were never so much as even known to the great Alexander when he settled and civilized the world. So you speak this strange tongue that did not exist at that time. That is, of course, your loss, and I'm very sad for you. I must say, however, that I'm very blessed by these wonderful things you call glasses. Had they existed in my day, perhaps I no doubt could have done much more. Regardless, in my apology if I was clumsy or rude, you understand English is a tongue with which I struggle at times. Usually, however, only when I try to speak it.
Yeah.
So to begin with, I bring greetings from Myra. I'm happy to be speaking with you in this celebration of the Advent season. I understand this is your second Sunday in Advent. Often there's too much emphasis on me at this time of year, and I hope that by speaking of myself, ironically, you will see for yourselves that I should not be the focus of the Advent. I am but a man. I was not the one who volunteered for the kenosis, the humbling and taking on flesh the blessed Paul spoke of in his letter to Philippi. I hope by seeing the imperfections in me, you will want to look away from me and look to him who is perfection in itself. As I told you, my name is Nicholas. I am, or was many years ago, the bishop of a city I knew as Myra in the region known as Lucia. The blessed apostle Paul stopped there on his way to Rome, where in Rome he was reborn into the heavenly kingdom. He became martyros. He became a witness there his final time in Rome. But he stopped on his way. You can read about that. I understand your scriptures are not divided into chapters. So chapter 27 of the Acts of the Blessed Apostles, you will read that story. Now, while I spent most of my life in Myra, I was actually born about 35 miles to the west, in a somewhat smaller seaport town of Patara. Now, my parents raised me in a very comfortable home. My father was a businessman named Theophanes. My mother's name, well, of course, was Nona. Although many historians have gotten both their names wrong, those were their names. We were a very devout family. My father catechized me from the very earliest years. We used something called the Didache. Anyone familiar with the Didache? Okay, a couple of you. Good. You are blessed. It is the teachings of the apostles, or so we're told. We don't really know, but it's very good teaching. It's a very good catechesis. And it was in these lessons from my earliest days that I learned the two greatest commandments. Now, our Lord repeated those two greatest commandments. How many of you know the two greatest commandments of the law? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. This is the interactive part. This is why when a friend of my father's came upon very hard times, I was moved to help. It was kind of a sad story. It seems this man had experienced a large failure in his business, but he had 3 lovely daughters at home to provide for. But with his assets gone, their family became destitute. That left him with nothing to provide as a dowry for his daughters to be married. And without husbands, their futures were bleak, most likely to be sold into a horrible kind of slavery, to work off their father's newly acquired debts. I heard of this horrible situation. With my parents' help, I accumulated a small bag of gold, essentially enough to provide for a dowry for the eldest daughter, with a little left over to help the rest of the family. So in the middle of the night, I snuck to their home, tossed the bag in the second-story window, and ran off unseen. I desired no credit, and I knew that if the family knew who it was, they would feel debt to me, and I did not want that. His fortunes did not really increase, so shortly thereafter I did it again and succeeded again in making my escape. By the third time, however, the father had begun staying upstairs, and awakened by the sound of the bag, as I'm sure you all know, bags of gold make a lot of noise when they hit the floor. He was able to catch me, and with tears in his eyes, he hugged me and said, "Why did you give us this money?" Well, I was a teenager, and I was kind of unprepared for being so assaulted by the grateful father. I didn't really know what to say. I said, "Well, because you needed it." And when he asked why I had insisted on my anonymity, I knew the answer. I knew what to say then. It is better to give if only God sees it. As an older teen, my parents died in a horrible plague. They succumbed fairly quickly, but their deaths were horrible and painful. You may, in your history books, read of the Decian plagues. These were one of the series of plagues that went through that area, claimed many lives. So I went to live with my father's brother, for whom I was named, who was a priest. While with my uncle in the monastery, I felt like the best thing to do with the somewhat significant inheritance I got was to sell it for cash and to distribute those funds to the poor. After that, at about age 20, my uncle ordained me to the priesthood. But my life was not easy. By this time, the Emperor Diocletian had begun a purge and a persecution of the Christians. And as a church leader, even though I was a very young man, I was jailed and beaten. The cells were rat-infested, cold, very unpleasant. As a result, I had the opportunity to share the gospel with my fellow prisoners, even some of the guards. The guards did not really come into the cells much, so my fellow prisoners and I could talk. And when the guards would come in, I would talk to the guards, share the gospel with them. You probably recall that the Blessed Apostle Paul had done the same thing when he was in jail. He'd shared the gospel with his jailers. And so, what can I do but follow his example? This went on for about 10 years before I was finally released. After my release, I immediately went back to Myra. So many were displaced, so many without food or shelter, many were orphaned. The church had the mission, given to us by God, of standing in the gap for these people. And God blessed our efforts to such a degree that I was able to leave that work after a few years and journey to Egypt and Palestine to further my own education. As I journeyed back from that to Myra, a storm threatened to destroy the ship I was on. The sailors were terrified, so I prayed for them, and the storm subsided.
When we got to Myra, naturally the word quickly got around the city, and the sailors came to my church for a blessing every time they got underway. I became the unofficial pastor of Mediterranean seamen. After the local bishop passed rather unexpectedly, and as I think as a result of this undeserved acclaim, I was elected by a conclave of other bishops to assume the bishopric. I wasn't aware that this meeting was going on. Perhaps you've had that experience, Your office has a meeting, and they elect a guy to some particular position of responsibility. Who do we select? Oh, let's select Nicholas. He's not here. They insisted that it was God's direction that had, and so I was not 30 years of age. I tried to talk them out of it. I'm too young to become a bishop. But they insisted that God had chosen me to be the bishop for Myra. What could I do but obey the unanimous voice of my bishops? Well, because my own parents had died when I was so young, I was keenly aware of the needs of children, and I focused much of my work in Myra for the next 12 years or so on meeting the needs of the poorest families in the area. I always managed to have some treats on my person, which I very freely gave to children. Hence, they flocked around me whenever I ventured out. As a result of this, I was surprised to find that my own influence with families, with the citizens, and even Roman officials rose somewhat precipitously. This gave me opportunity to do more for families, and it also gave me an opportunity to tear down and replace many of the pagan temples with houses of worship. In one particular instance, I was able to force the retrial of a man unrighteously condemned for a capital crime. They were getting ready to execute him, and I was able to prevail upon his jailers to let him go. In another situation, I was able to, circumvent certain civil rulers and appeal directly to the emperor because the taxes in our region were so dreadfully hard on the poorest of the poor. Constantine was the emperor, and I was able to prevail upon him, and he lessened the tax burden for our poor. In Myra, in 333, Myra was suffering famine, and I was able to convince the captain of a convoy of ships that were bound for Alexandria, remember this was a seaport, to donate 1/10 of his cargo to the people of Myra. Now he was very concerned that if he didn't show up in Alexandria with the amount of grain that he was commissioned with, he would be in great trouble, liable for the deficit. I knew that God would provide for him. I trusted that God would provide. I shared with him that God would provide. For some reason, he believed me, and so he left 1/10 of the cargo, not from one ship, but from several ships in a convoy. And when he got to Alexandria, the Lord had replenished his holds, so that when he arrived, there was, as far as the receiving people, there was exactly what they were expecting to get with no losses. Just as God had stretched the oil for the sanctification of the temple when it was restored, God stretched the wheat for blessing there. As funds came into the church, I insisted that they be distributed to the poorest of the poor, sometimes delivering the gifts myself, again in the middle of the night, which is rapidly becoming my habit. Not knowing who I was, they sometimes referred to me as the angel dressed in red robes. Well, I am certainly no angel, and I deserve no honors, no accolades. It was God who had provided for those monies. I was merely his temporary pocket. Thankfully, the persecutions largely ended when Constantine came to the throne. Christianity became a legal religion. Shortly after he came to power,
however, an invitation came. The emperor wanted to convene an ecumenical council of all the bishops at this small city named Nicaea. I was not anxious to go. My experience overall with emperors had not been good. And so I was a bit suspicious when he wanted to gather all of the Christian bishops in one place at one time. I think the word you may have is paranoia. I thought it simply good sense. My concerns were widely shared. There were 1,800 bishops in our region, and only 300 of us showed up. So I wasn't the only one that was concerned. When I arrived in Nicaea, however, it was not hard to pick out the confessors. Now, I probably need to explain what a confessor was. During the persecution, there was great pressure brought upon Christians to disclaim the Lord, to disavow a commitment to Christ. We were compelled to take a pinch of incense and present it at the altar for the Kaiser, for Caesar. It was idolatry. And the devout Christians simply would not do this. And many paid great penalties in their bodies, many paid with their lives. The word you use is martyr. They were killed for their faith. But the word martyr actually means a witness, one who gives testimony. In your court of law, when somebody is brought forth to the dock to give testimony as a witness to what they saw or did not see, the word we use in Greek was martyros. So those of us who survived these persecutions without giving up our faith, and many succumbed. The pressures were great, the pressures were severe. Those of us who did not give in to the pressure were referred to as the confessors. And as I said, it was not difficult to figure out who the confessors were in the crowd in Nicaea. We were the ones with scars, missing eyes, missing limbs, or other disabilities resulting from imprisonment under Diocletian. I blessed my Creator that he gave me the strength not to succumb to the pressures and the tortures to give up my Lord. And in spite of the pains which became my constant companion due to a severe head injury, I was struck in the head, given what I think you call a concussion, and nearly died. But the Lord preserved my life. So I was there. The council was convened primarily to discuss two issues, although there were other issues of church discipline, and one in response to how the church should receive the lapsed. The lapsed were those who succumbed to the temptation to disavow their Lord. And after the persecution was over, they repented of their faith, they repented of their failure, but the church had to deal with, okay, how do we accept them? So that was one of the issues. But the two primary issues were, number one, how do we observe Easter? When do we observe Easter? And by the way you observe Easter here in the West, the second Sunday after the first Sunday after the first full moon after Lent, is how we decided to do it. The second was a discussion about the nature of Jesus and his relationship with the Father. Was he eternally begotten by the Father, of the same being, the same essence as the Father? Or was he, as the priest Arius was scandalously teaching, the first creation of the Father? Created ex nihilo, but still a creation. A being so similar to the Father that he could be the creator of all else, as is outlined at the beginning of the Gospel of the Blessed John. By the way, for the record, Arius was teaching this in defiance of his own bishop. The good news is this was all on Constantine's bill. He paid for the transportation. He paid for our lodging, food. Each bishop who attended had free travel and could bring with him 2 priests and 3 deacons. So even though there were 300 bishops who arrived, there were 5 people that came with them. So each one was actually 6 people. So once again, we're back up to the 1800 that was kind of expected. The council opened on the 20th of May in the year of our Lord, 325. It went on for quite a while until the 25th of August. The first month, however, was devoted to the Arian controversy. Some historians don't believe that Arius was physically present since he wasn't a bishop. But I'm telling you that Constantine himself called Arius to the committee to argue on his own behalf. If you're being accused in Roman law, you have the right to testify on your own behalf. Arius was insisting on his own orthodoxy, and this was essentially a trial for heresy. And he would not make a distinction between his views and biblical orthodoxy until we struggled and finally introduced a couple of Greek terms from the Gnostics. The terms were homoousia and homoiousia. The homoousia means exactly of the same essence. Homoiousia means very similar, divine, but separate from the Father. The decision was not warmly embraced by the bishops because we'd been fighting Gnosticism for quite some time. It was very much on the table. So we weren't anxious to borrow from there. But it was the only way that we could describe the deity of Christ that would force Arius to acknowledge that he differed from biblical Christian orthodoxy. And believe me, Arius was a clever fellow. The purveyors of heresy often are. Otherwise, people wouldn't believe them. Now, I know the stories. I know the question that is on all of your minds. Did I actually slap Arius? Well, I was, by this time, a fairly old man, in a lot of pain, and a bit cranky. So I could leave it to you to form your own conclusions as to what you think might have happened. The fact is that I did, and the other bishops were forced to censure me for that, because it was illegal to strike a member of the clergy, even if you were a higher-ranking member of the clergy. This was a source of great consternation. They finally got the emperor involved in the discussion. I was restored to the bishopric, but you will quite often see icons showing me without the bishop's mitre. That was kind of the compromise. Because of his reputation, we will overlook this discrepancy, this indiscretion, but we generally won't portray him that way with the bishop's mitre. So, yes, I got so frustrated I struck Arius, and I apologize for that. It's simply one of my failings. Now, I'd like to shift gears a little bit to deal with some of the Santa Claus legends. First of all, Santa Claus is derived from Sinterklaas, which is derived itself. Klaus was from Nicholas, and Sinter was from saint. So people often refer to me as Saint Nicholas. The Catholics refer to me as Saint Nicholas. The Eastern Orthodox Church refers to me as Saint Nicholas. I'm really not comfortable with that. I would be much happier if you would simply call me Nicholas, as your brother in Christ. Or if you want to respect my position, I understand that. You can call me Bishop Nicholas or Elder Nicholas. It's the same word. But that whole saint thing, I'm very uncomfortable with that. All believers are saints. All those who name the name of Christ and are rightly related to him in faith are saints. The blessed Paul opens his letter to the believers in Ephesus with these words: Paulos apostolos Christu Jesu othenalamatos theu tois agios tois usin en Epheso. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of God, to the saints who live in Ephesus. He was writing to the whole church. If he were writing to you, he would write to the saints who worship at Lot Raven. Second, my parents were Greek-speaking Turks. The area is an area in Asia, and in this part of the area that is now called Turkey, I hate to tell you this, but there were no reindeer in Turkey. We rode horses, sometimes donkeys, and sometimes we walked. Often walking was easier than dealing with a donkey. So, sorry, there were no reindeer. We did not have any, not only did we not have flying reindeer, we didn't have flying reindeer, and we did not have reindeer with noses that glowed red. I know you're brokenhearted, but I have to tell you the truth. Third, I'm not going to shoot down all of your stories. The third one is that, in fact, I do like cookies and candy. And number fourth, there is a song written in 1934 called Santa Claus is Coming to Town. The author, Haven Gillespie, writes these lyrics and he says, he's making a list and checking it twice, going to find out who's naughty or nice. So you've all been indoctrinated. Very good. The scriptures, however, tell us what? Who's nice? Nobody. Who's naughty? All of us. What a silly list. What a silly thing. So I completely disavow that. I've read the scriptures and I know that for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. We like sheep have gone astray. It applies to me. The prophet Jeremiah declared that our hearts are deceitful above all things. Your heart will, and almost certainly does, lie to you. Just follow your heart. No, that's a bad idea. Follow the scriptures. So don't worry about whatever might be on any list that I would keep. There is another list, however, that you should find concerning. In our blessed Apostle John's final letter, now some of you may call it his Apocalypse, some of you may refer to it as the book of Revelation, we read, "And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heavens fled away. There was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. And the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of the things that were written in these books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were all judged, every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whoever was not found written in the book of life," there is a list, "whoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire." A little further on it says, "And there shall in no wise enter into it anything," it being the heavenly city, "nothing shall enter into it that defiles, neither whatsoever works abomination, or maketh lies, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life." It is the Lamb's book of life which contains the list that you and I should be concerned about. I implore you, make sure your name is written there. The consequences are more than a couple of lumps of coal from me. I'm not coming down your chimney anyway. The consequences of not being on that list are eternal. So make sure today, may this celebration of our Savior's nativity be the time for your own second nativity as you are born again from above. I thank you. Pastor, would you pray for your flock?
Amen. What a privilege to meet you. I've never met you before. What a privilege it is to have you with us today.
I don't get in this very often.
Well, say thank you to John if you do see him again.
I'm sure I will.
I'm glad he was able to invite you to come and join us. Probably a great time. A great time. Yes, indeed.